Welcome back to In Focus. Joe Biden is getting hit with a lawsuit over his student loan bailout. Public interest attorney Frank Garrison filed the suit Tuesday against the Department of Education, calling the $500 million cancellation illegal. If you're unaware, the president announced last month that he would cancel $10,000 to $20,000 in loan debt per loan borrower, depending on their income status or Pell Grant status. Now look, you know that I am adamantly against the student loan cancellation for very simple reasons. I don't think I or you or any other taxpayer should be forced to pay off someone else's degree. That's simple. And we know that Biden has previously admitted he doesn't have the authority to do that. Nancy Pelosi has said he doesn't have the authority to do that. Biden arguably just admitted he did it on a totally illegitimate basis when he did it, because he used COVID emergency authorization to cancel the debt, then turned around and said there's no pandemic anymore, no emergency. But what do I know? What do I know? I'm no lawyer, so I have my friend Bob Bianchi from Long Crime Network here with me to be the voice of impartiality and legality, because Bob is a lawyer. Bob, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. So Biden is being sued. The Department of Education is being sued more specifically for this student loan, cancellation, forgiveness, call it what you will. What is the case here, and how do you think it's going to end up looking for Uncle Joe?
Hey, Addison, thanks for having me on. So, look, this case is interesting to me let's unpack it a little bit. This plaintiff is saying, I live in Indiana, and Indiana has now passed a law that says that the student loan forgiveness that I'm going to get is going to lead to taxable income. So therefore, I am a harmed plaintiff. I'm a person who's being harmed by this because I'm going to be taxed for this loan forgiveness. Now, a lot of the attorney generals around the country who are against this program have had one significant problem. They can't find a person who's actually, quote unquote, harmed. And you can't bring a lawsuit because you just don't like something. You have to be harmed. So the interesting thing is the Biden administration then telegraphed in response to this lawsuit that, you know what, we're going to give an opt-out option for people who don't want student loan forgiveness, who are otherwise where it would be available. So even the plaintiff's attorney in this case has said this may be a stumbling block to this lawsuit because the factor that's required, that is that you need to be harmed, will be removed if there's an opt-out option so that he would not be penalized by taxes in the state of Indiana. So, courts are funny, Addison. In fact, I just got done with one of these arguments in one of the cases that I'm currently handling, where the judge did not issue a ruling on all of this fancy stuff that we argued, but basically on a very limited basis said, you know what? I can rule just on this alone, and I don't have to address all these other issues. You may find that here, where the federal court opts out of handling this lawsuit, arguing he's not a harmed plaintiff any longer.
Now, also, I'm reading from this Fox News article. It says Frank Garrison, who is the attorney who filed this, they're arguing that the Biden administration turning to the HEROES Act, which allows the government to modify loans to assist veterans and their families as needed during times of war and other national emergencies, is a flimsy pretext for a major policy change that Congress has declined to enact. So he used the HEROES Act. This is an emergency authorization. Could Biden's statement that the pandemic's over be used usefully against him in this lawsuit on a legal basis to say, hey, you're saying there's no emergency, but you used an emergency act to do this. You basically admitted it's illegitimate. Do you think that that could be used against him?
It definitely will be used against him. There's no question it'll be argued. Whether it'll be efficacious or work with a court is a whole nother matter, but it's certainly something that's not going to help. I guess the argument that the Biden administration, lawyers, this is what we do. We think, well, how will they counter that argument? We'll say that this is in relation to the pandemic and the economic consequences that are still ongoing as a result of that pandemic. But the lawyers for the administration certainly would prefer not to have statements made that the pandemic is over, because it kind of undercuts their position to, obviously the pandemic we're continuing, and we still had a continuing emergency where this was required, is a much more solid argument for the Biden administration to argue.
Now, Bob, I want to switch gears and get your thoughts on this as well, a legal take for this, because this has been all over the news. It's something I've already talked about a good bit on the show. Mark Houck out of Pennsylvania was raided by the FBI. Between 25 to 30 agents came in and busted down his door at gunpoint. His family, his children, and his wife saw the whole thing, and he was drug out for allegedly pushing an abortion volunteer worker at a Planned Parenthood or an abortion clinic, pushing him over a year ago. He's volunteered to turn himself in. The charges were thrown out. The FBI came and busted down his door. Your thoughts on this? I mean, from what I've seen, from who I've talked to, this seems to be a gross overreach of power and something that he could definitely capitalize on in court.
Okay, so we'll leave the merits of the case aside for a moment. We're talking about police tactics here, or law enforcement tactics. Now, to be fair, there is a dispute, and the FBI did put a statement out and said that they did not use the kind of force that was being alleged here. But let's assume for the sake of argument that 25 FBI agents and 15 cars, because that's what we're hearing from their side, with guns drawn, knocking on the door, entering the door, pointing the weapons at these individuals and around kids. If in fact that is what happened, that to me is an obviously excessive scenario. It was unwarranted, not necessary, and many times, let's face this, what this case is. Somebody here was pushed. Okay, that's not a good thing. He's arguing how it was self-defense. We'll have to determine that. But this man was, I think his finger may have been injured. This is not the kind of case that would require a SWAT response, if you will, from a reputable individual, whether you agree with his opinions or not, who is not otherwise been involved with law enforcement. There's no risk of flight. And typically speaking, Addison, we do make arrangements to say, listen, let's just, if you're going to arrest him, if there's going to be a charge, we'll bring him down. You don't even need to go get him. We'll bring him down. He's not going anywhere. He's got kids. He's got a stable, background. It's these kind of encounters that cause a greater threat to not only the individual, but law enforcement themselves. How many encounters do we see where they make a tactical entry into a location and the person on the other side of the door doesn't know what's going on, a shootout occurs and somebody dies? Now, again, I caveat this with a big, healthy dose of the FBI is disputing these facts because it sounds extraordinarily unlike them based on my experience.
Now, the DOJ is trying to get him on the FACE Act, the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. They're saying he violated that when he apparently shoved this Planned Parenthood volunteer who was apparently harassing his son. But the FACE Act, from what I understand, does not cover one-on-one altercations like the one that is in question here. Is that correct, Bob? What do you know about that?
Well, listen, the act is basically trying to protect individuals who are going for, into these facilities, into a care facility, from being intimidated, harassed, threatened, or assaulted. You bring up the point that's most relevant to me. The first thing that I looked at was really odd to me is that state charges were initially brought. The quote-unquote person that was thrown down onto the ground filed charges that were thrown out by state prosecutors, and not until a significant period of time later, I think it may have been like up to a year, maybe even longer, now they come in and they arrest him. So it gets down to, look, as a former prosecutor, I ran a prosecutorial agency, okay? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So if this was not an attempt to literally stop somebody and prevent them from going into the facility, but rather an argument or an altercation that occurs where he alleges his son was being verbally abused or attacked or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't implicate the law that's in place for the purpose of making sure people have free access to go into those locations. Rather, it's an argument that just happened between two people. This is not the kind of case that I'm going to waste government resources in prosecuting as far as I would be concerned.
Interesting. Bob Bianchi, it's always great to have you on the show to bring in the legal perspective for all the craziness going on. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure, Addison. Thank you.